In this video, we're going to be breaking down the best and worst DPS to play after the patch that's going live on the 15th. Not only has the meta across ranks been more established, but because of all these changes, we're going to see some crazy movement with a lot of DPS characters. And in addition, based on Overwatch League stats, we know what the post-patch top level gameplay is, what DPS were picked at the highest level in the Overwatch League. But this tier list is not going to be based purely from the top-down balance. Many tier lists like to just take whatever is played at top 500 or the pro level and put those as the best characters in the game. But that's not indicative of the average ranked experience. So some characters are going to be moved up the list if they have a special X factor that can make them a good pick to climb with. But I want to introduce you to the sponsor of this video, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is a mobile turn-based strategy game with over 600 champions, all with unique factions and their own history. Now, my personal favorite faction is the High Elves because their backstory is pretty freaking sick. The homeland of Ravia has been around for thousands of years, and they've done tons of things like survive the fall of the Lizardman Empire, helped humans form civilizations, and defeat orcs when they summoned a huge horde to attack the continent. Now, things got a bit twisted when Suroth, the Lord of Darkness, convinced a ton of the elves to go evil and attack the kingdom. That civil war almost made the elves go extinct, but they survived, rebuilt, and are now stronger than ever. My personal favorite elf is a high elf ethos that has not one, but two insane AoE abilities. Now, this is a huge month for Raid. They introduced a brand new faction, the Chauvin Watchers, with new champions, Force Elves, Ints, Druids, Phase, and for you Amazon Prime members, you get exclusive rewards in Raid right now. Plus, a new season of the Forge Pass is coming, so don't miss it. Scan my QR code or use the link in the description for a free bonus worth $30, including an epic champion Rector draft, 20,000 silver, 1 energy refill, an XP boost, and more. All this treasure is waiting for you right here, so go check it out in the links down below. And thanks Raid once again for sponsoring this video. Now, I know what some of you are going to say. Mills, didn't you make a video that said not to watch tier lists and not to follow the meta? I think it's important to understand what characters are strong and weak when they're played optimally and in certain situations, but do not take any tier list, including this one, as gospel. Any character on this list can be grinded and played to and in Grandmaster. So keep that in mind before we get started. Now, first off, we got to talk about the F tier, and there's only one hero in the F tier, and it's Mei, because you can't select her because she's disabled. All joking aside, post-patch, she should be back in the game, and the reality of the situation is there are no F or D tier heroes, because honestly, even the worst heroes in the game in the DPS role are still viable in the right hands. And that's why we're going to start with the C tier. Now, there are 4 characters in the C tier. We have Mei, Sim, Junkrat, and Bastion. Now, this tier means that these characters can be pretty strong when you play them in the right compositions on the right maps, and they can be very strong if you play them with expertise. As an example, maps that have more narrow choke points that Junkrat can get value against is going to be typically better than maps that are much more wide open. Characters like Mei are going to go better against compositions that don't have as much mobility so that she could get more wall value. And Bastion is going to be a character that really fits with certain supports like Kiriko, Baptiste, or Mercy. That being said, on the flip side, some of these characters have pretty easy counters, especially if you don't know how to play around them correctly. Sim and Junkrat and Mei all have trouble with characters like Pharah. Junkrat and Bastion both struggle against a good D.Va, and especially after the Zarya nerfs, even though D.Va's getting nerfed as well, it's going to hit Zarya a lot worse, and with less Zarya play, D.Va becomes a much better pick, especially for ranked. So each of these characters are incredibly strong at doing certain things, but they also have very key targetable weaknesses, and it's really going to be up to you whether or not you learn to master how to play against those weaknesses, because there are some players that have grinded a Grandmaster with all of these characters and still play them in those ranks, so you can find that success. It's just going to be a little bit tricky when you're being selectively targeted by characters that can and do want to shut you down. Now, the next category is actually the largest category. This is the B tier, and these are characters that have very strong power, but there are some characters that do what they do slightly better in some situations, or there are certain characters that are going to see a lot of play that actually hurt these characters or their play styles. Now, first off, let's talk about the 3 different ones in the B tier. Pharah, Torb, and Widowmaker. Now, we did talk about Pharah. Pharah is a character that has very, very polarizing matchups at times. There's characters that she can completely shut down. If the enemy is playing like a Genji Junkrat, for instance, on first point defense, you could swap to a Pharah Mercy and just shut that down. Pharah gets a ton of pick rate as well on control maps, but the problem with Pharah is that she's not the easiest to solo queue climb with, and you need to be pretty good at Pharah. I think a lot of people just think you could just pick the character and even up against things you counter, you could do well with, but that's not always the case. A really poor Pharah leaves a ton of gaps to exploit, so you have to put in the time and effort to get good at her, but I do think that she's an amazing flex pick, and if you're someone that can get that consistent duo partner that will actually Pharah Mercy with you, then I think that you should put in substantial effort into grinding this character because she can carry games, and it's just a great character to whip out when you're up against those Junkrat and Sim mains or on Koth. Torb's a character that has some of the highest win rate in the lower ranks below Diamond, and he's actually one of the best characters to climb with, although I'm not entirely sure if that sets you up for success past the Diamond rank. But if your goal is to win a lot of the low rank games, Torb brings a ton of value and his win rate reflects that. I personally know some people that were in low platinum and they one-trick Torb straight to high diamond with a huge win rate when they couldn't win on anything else. So that tells you a little bit about the potential power level of the character. Now, as you climb, Torb gets less and less effective as players get more disciplined up against Torb, but especially for, I would say, anything under Masters, Torb is definitely a solid pick, and I think that if you get really good at utilizing his turret and positioning properly where you don't get punished, you can get value out of Torb at any rank. Now, I did mention Widowmaker, and this is not in the order of B tier, by the way. All these characters are just in the B tier, so you could make an argument that Widow is higher in the B tier or lower, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Now, Widow is really, really powerful. She's a character that, in the right hands, can absolutely carry games, and she actually is a bit better in this 5v5 environment than she was in the 6v6 environment. That being said, if you're a player that gets really good at Widowmaker or you practice Widowmaker at the low ranks, there's a couple of problems that you can run into. The first one is people don't peel for you at all. And if you are good at Widowmaker, two things are going to happen. They're going to send their tank and multiple divers after you, and you're going to get no peel. And you have to get enough value between the time that they are coming for you and the time they get to you. Or the enemy's going to swap Widow, and you're going to just have to Widow diff them. And oftentimes, a good Widowmaker wants the enemy to swap Widow. They would much rather that than have a damn wrecking ball that just goes and sits on them the entire game. But it can be frustrating to try to be someone that just mains Widow. I think that she's a great pick on maps like Junkertown, but you gotta actually have a flex pick that you kind of fall back to when things don't work out, especially if you're trying to grind through the lower and mid ranks. But of course, if you're absolutely super cracked at Widowmaker, then you could definitely make her work. Although there's some characters at the higher levels of play that really hurt Widowmaker, and especially when we're going to see more Reaper and Diva play, I would say that she only makes it towards the top of B tier because unfortunately there's another character that does similar things to Widowmaker, but is far less susceptible to dive and can fight at close range. Before we get to that though, let's talk about the last three in the B tier: Soldier, Cassidy, and Hanzo. And all of these I'm kind of putting in the same group here. And you might be wondering why. Well, each of these characters have their own strengths and weaknesses when compared to each other. Cassidy has a high amount of consistency in that mid to close range, and he can finish off close range targets. Hanzo has pick-off potential with information even from further ranges, and Soldier has individual sustain and mobility all wrapped in one, and each of these characters are all fine. I think if you're good with these characters, you can make them work, and they're going to be flexible in their application dependent on your skill and dependent on the map. That being said, there is one character that is already in the S tier, spoiler alert, that is just strictly better, or at least potentially strictly better than all of these, which is Sojourn. Sojourn has better close range mobility. Sojourn has consistent close range damage and long range pickoffs. She combines a lot of the best aspects of all these characters, and in her current state, if you get good at Sojourn, it's far better than getting good at Soldier, and it's far better than getting good at Cassidy or Hanzo or even Widowmaker. Sojourn is the character that you would rather be great at. That is why she's higher up on the list. That doesn't mean that you can't perform well with these characters, and that doesn't mean that you can't be a more effective Cassidy than a Sojourn, but from equal skill level and equal power level, Sojourn's just way too powerful when we're going into this patch where she's already the strongest DPS and she's not getting hit. Next up, we got to talk about the A tier. These are characters that are great in many situations, and if you master these characters, you're going to set yourself up for success going into this next patch. Now, first off, we do got to talk about Sombra. Sombra is getting a rather large nerf, and this means that Sombra is going to be a character that isn't going to be as capable of getting pickoffs like she once was. But the really effective parts of Sombra's kit are still intact, namely the fact that she can hack, shut down characters, and she has a very powerful ultimate. Also, she gets to scout for information. Sombra's going to be a great character to pick when you're trying to shut down characters like Hammond and Doomfist and really be disruptive on a team. If you have some teammates that can follow up your damage, follow up your hacks, she's still going to be great. However, I think that generally for solo queue, and especially as we get to the lower ranks, Sombra is not going to be as good. So you're going to have to kind of decide when to play her and where. Are there characters you can counter and shut down? Are there teammates that are going to follow you up? What is your rank? And that's going to all kind of tie in to dictate should you play Sombra or not. But because of that flexibility and utility, I'm still going to put her in the A tier a bet at the bottom. And especially because she's also unique. There's no other character that does what she does. And unlike characters like Soldier, Cassidy, and Hanzo that have a character that does something similar but better, Sombra is unique in what she is used for, and she's very strong at it. Next up on the list, we do got to talk about Echo. I think that Echo is one of the most underrated DPS on the entire roster. Echo's fantastic. And the cool thing about Echo is you can really adopt your playstyle around your comp. You can play a ground Echo when you don't have that pocket and just poke a lot, build your ultimate, find key opportunities to go in with your beam. You can play a fly Echo that's much more like a Pharah, spamming from range, going for flanks and lurks and trying to burst someone down and then just beam them to death, get a quick kill and dip out. There's a lot you can do on Echo and plays that you can make on Echo. I think that a lot of people haven't properly learned Echo. I think I probably need to make an Echo guide. I've been asked for it a couple of times, but it's one of the most underrated DPS, period. And there's also the added benefit that Echo is one of the few DPS that can actually kill a tank. Like if a Winston jumps in, you can break his bubble almost instantly with your beam and kill the Winston, or you can punish divas that are flying in. There's a lot to love about this character, and I think that Echo's primed to get even better post the nerfs. Next up in the A tier, we do got to talk about Genji. Now, Genji is receiving huge nerfs to his kit. That damage nerf cannot be understated, and the fact that he has less ammo is just going to be a little bit annoying. Now, all in all, is Genji still a great character to punish enemies' mistakes? Yes. Is he still going to be a great character to learn and master if you want to climb to Grandmaster? Yes, he's going to be still very good and capable of climbing you. That being said, he's not going to be as strong at the highest levels. This is going to further push him away from the go-to dive DPS at the highest ranks, but in general, Genji is still going to be very strong. So if your goal is to get to Grandmaster or dominate in Platinum, don't worry, Genji is still going to be a very good pick. And all in all, when compositions are playing dive characters like Winston, like Diva, and you're going after a target, Genji is one of the best ways to forward that momentum, and still, Dragon Blade is one of the best ultimates, period. If you learn Dragon Blade, get good at it, you're gonna carry fight after fight, which means more game wins, high win rates, and you're just going to climb. So Genji's still great, but for like a high rank meta tier list, he probably would be down lower. But for a tier list that takes in all ranks and thinks about how he's gonna be used in solo queue and things like that, I think he's still pretty solid. Now, the last character in the A tier, and this character is another character that I think is a bit underrated, very strong, and that's Ashe. I think that Ashe is actually fundamentally different from characters like Hanzo, Cassidy, and Soldier because she brings something very unique to the table that can't really be replicated in the same way that Soldier can. She brings a ton of AoE damage. She does it consistently, and especially if she gets pocketed, she can one-tap tons of squishies, get consistent value, and her ultimate is super strong in a 5v5 environment. Add to that the fact that she has vertical mobility and the ability to knock back enemies that dive on top of her. I think that a really great pocketed Ashe or even a solo Ashe that is disciplined with good mechanical skill can absolutely carry games. And I would say that out of all the hit scan characters, the pure hit scans, Ashe is the one that reigns supreme. And of course, that doesn't count Sojourn. I'm counting her as a projectile, even though Railgun is hit scan. It just gets complicated at this point. Now, I want to reiterate this one more time before we get into the S tier. All of these characters are fairly viable, and every single one of them can dominate in the low to mid ranks if you learn to master them. Unlike both tank and support that I think have clear characters that are just really, really bad, the DPS don't really have that. The DPS are actually pretty close together in bottom to top power level, so I think that for the most part, most things are viable generally. Now, talking about that S tier, at the bottom of the S tier, we have Tracer. I think that Tracer is getting big ups from the changes to the nerfs, specifically to Sombra and Genji, where Tracer becomes a really great diver that a lot of Genji mains are going to start picking Tracer over, and Sombra mains as well. Tracer's just really, really efficient, and I understand that a lot of people think that she doesn't do very much damage, but especially when you have characters diving in like Winston, we'll see a lot more play. You need to trade your abilities efficiently and follow up on damage. Tracer is just freaking amazing, and I do think that Tracer is one of the hardest carry characters right now, and while this might not be true if you don't have the skill to back her up, she is a character that I think is definitely worth learning. Very, very strong. And the thing that you need to understand is that if you master Tracer, you can effectively 1v1 all these other DPS. I would say Tracer's the god of 1v1s. She's priced to get even better, and she's definitely a character worth learning. But realize that it's a long road getting good at Tracer. She's very hard to master. Next up, we do got to talk about Reaper. And Reaper's a character that is really winning here. A lot of players have kind of realized how good Reaper is, but I think he still doesn't get the credit he deserves. We saw a lot of play in the Overwatch League. And the thing about Reaper, though, is that Reaper doesn't need a crazy amount of skill to enable and play well. I think once you get to the point where you're reliably body pumping, two-tapping people from close range, which isn't really that hard mechanically to do, you open up the opportunities for carry in the lower ranks when you can just run at an Ana and just kill her super, super quickly, and then get out scot-free, go Wraith away, turn the corner, and then just play the corner, where Reaper is just amazing at. On top of that, he can keep a ton of tanks in check, which is something that not every DPS can do. And his ultimate's just great in a 5v5 format. I think that Reaper is phenomenal for climbing and carrying. He's a character that you should be playing more. And in fact, I would say he's my #1 pick for a character to climb. If you are just underneath the Masters rank and you want to climb to Masters, I would suggest Reaper over any other character on this list. He teaches you the fundamentals of engaging. He teaches you a lot of cooldown management, and he is a character that is capable to carry and then even past Masters rank. So yeah, definitely would suggest Reaper. And I think he's a top 3 DPS going into the meta post the patch. Now, yeah, we're definitely not forgetting any character. Let's end the tier list here. I wish, but no. Sojourn. Sojourn's the best DPS in the game. Now, I will say that Sojourn isn't a character that is going to completely dominate. I think as the lower in rank you go, the less she gets better than the other picks. Like, for instance, the average plat or gold Sojourn is not going to be better than the average plat or gold Cassidy or Hanzo or Soldier. These are characters that I think get value easier than Sojourn. Now, as you climb, Sojourn gets value easier and gets value in situations that those characters never did due to her mastery with her railgun. This means that Sojourn is not necessarily the best of the best if you are not talking about the high ranks. I think that she's still viable, though, at every rank. And I think that if you play Sojourn, you're going to become a better player. I would definitely suggest going into Vaxa, V-A-X-T-A, and just playing against the bots, turning on that railgun ultimate, and just practicing, then going into a ranked game right after you warmed up and just slaughtering people. Just slaughter people. But really, when we add everything together on Sojourn's kit, her mobility, the fact that she's good at both close range and long range, she has dive capabilities, and she's very hard to dive herself. It's just ridiculous what she could do. It's just absolutely ridiculous, and she's undoubtedly the best character in the entire game right now. So if you're not locking Sojourn, I don't care what character you're locking, whether it's Junkrat or Mei or Cassidy or Sombra, expect to go up against Sojourns a lot. Expect to play against them and start developing good and consistent strategies up against Sojourns. Figure out what works against them, figure out ways that you are getting value against them consistently, and that's going to be one of your routes to actually climb. And this is where tier lists can kind of be useful, because then you can think about what characters you're going to run into and develop strategies with your mains to best deal with those and farm them. I hope you farm all the Sojourns in the world. Good luck. Anyways, thank you so much for coming to this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And as a last special thanks for Raid for sponsoring this video.